We understand the importance of an uninterrupted food supply to African countries. This is important for socio-economic development and for maintaining political stability. Therefore, we always pay and will continue to pay special attention to the supply of wheat, barley, corn, and other grain crops to African friends, including as humanitarian aid through the UN Food Program. Dear friends, the numbers speak for themselves. Last year, trade in agricultural products between Russia and African countries grew by 10% and amounted to $6.7 billion. And in January-June of this year it has already increased by a record 60%. Russia exported grains to Africa in 2022, 11.5 million tons. And in the first 6 months of this year alone almost 10 million tons. And this is despite the illegal sanctions imposed on our exports, which seriously impede the supply of Russian food, which complicate transportation, logistics, insurance and bank payments. A paradoxical picture emerges. On the one hand, Western countries create obstacles to the supply of our grain and fertilizers. And on the other hand, I will say this frankly, they hypocritically accuse us of the current crisis situation in the world food market. This approach was especially clearly manifested in the implementation of the so-called grain deal, concluded with the participation of the UN Secretariat and initially aimed at ensuring global food security, to reduce the threat of hunger and to help the poorest countries, including in Africa. However, in almost a year, within the framework of this so-called deal, a total of 32.8 million tons of cargo was exported from Ukraine, of which more than 70%, dear friends, went to countries with high and upper middle income levels, including and above all in European Union. Whereas the share of such countries as Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, and a number of other countries, I ask your attention, accounted for less than 3% of the total volume, which is less than 1 million tons. Russia agreed to participate in this so-called deal, including taking into account the obligations contained in it, that illegitimate obstacles to the supply of our grain and fertilizers to world markets will be removed. And I want to tell you that this, and above all this, is helping the poorest countries. In fact, nothing happened from what we discussed and from what they promised us. None of the terms of the deal concerning the withdrawal from the sanctions of Russian exports of grain and fertilizers to world markets were fulfilled by them. None. Just now my colleagues and I were discussing this with the leadership of the African Union. Obstacles were also created for us to free delivery mineral fertilizers to the poorest countries in need. Of the 262,000 tons of such fertilizers blocked in European ports, we managed to send only 2 shipments. Only 20,000 tons to Malawi and 34,000 tons to Kenya. The rest of our fertilizers remained in the hands of the Europeans. And this despite the fact that it was a purely humanitarian action, which, in principle, should not be subject to any sanctions. Well, someone does not want Russia, as some say, to get rich so that it sends money to military purposes. But this is a gratuitous delivery. No, they do not release our fertilizers. This is despite all their empty talk about wanting to help the poorest countries. Taking into account the mentioned facts, we refuse to further extend this deal. I have already said that our country is able to replace Ukrainian grain both on a commercial basis and in the form of gratuitous assistance to the most needy countries in Africa, especially since we are again expecting a record harvest this year. Well, to be specific, I will say that we will be ready in the coming months. In the next 3 to 4 months, to provide Burkina Faso, Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, the Central African Republic, Eritrea with 50,000 tons free of charge grains. We will also provide free delivery of these products to consumers. Perhaps you will be interested in a few more numbers. Ukraine produced about 55 million tons of grain in the last agricultural year. Their exports amounted to 47 million tons. This is a lot. Of these, 17 million tons is wheat. And Russia, dear colleagues, harvested 156 million tons of grain last year. It exported 60 million tons. Of these, 48 million tons is wheat. Russia's share in the world wheat market is 20%. The share of Ukraine is less than 5%. This means that it is Russia that makes a significant contribution to global food security and that it is a solid, responsible international supplier of agricultural products. And those who claim that this is not so, that this is only the provision of this so-called grain deal for the export of Ukrainian grain, they are simply distorting the facts. They are lying. As a matter of fact, this has been the practice of some Western states for decades, if not centuries. Our country will continue to support countries and regions in need, including with its humanitarian supplies. We strive to actively participate in the formation of a more equitable system of resource distribution. We are doing our best to prevent a global food crisis. In principle, we are convinced that with the application of appropriate agricultural technologies and with the proper organization of agricultural production, Africa in the future can not only feed itself, ensure its own food security, but also become an exporter of various types of food. And from Russia there will be only support. I assure you. Yesterday, during bilateral meetings, we were just talking about this with colleagues, and African colleagues told me that they have the opportunity to produce food. They need technologies, appropriate support. For its part, Russia is ready to share its expertise in the field of agricultural production with African countries and to assist in the introduction of the most advanced technologies. We are also interested in the further development of cooperation with African countries in the energy sector. This cooperation is based on our rich experience. For many years, Soviet and Russian specialists have designed and built large power units in Angola, Egypt, Ethiopia and other countries of the continent with a total capacity of 4.6 gigawatts. I want to emphasize this and draw your attention to this. Dear friends, we have created a total of a quarter of all the hydropower capacities in Africa. Currently, Russian companies are implementing new mutually beneficial projects aimed at meeting the growing needs of the African economies for fuel and generating capacity, at providing Africans with access to affordable and reliable, sustainable and environmentally friendly energy sources. More than 30 promising energy projects with Russian participation in 16 African states are now in varying degrees of development. The total capacity of the power projects we are working on today is approximately 3.7 gigawatts. Our company Rushydro offers a wide range of services to African partners, from the design and supply of equipment to the modernization and construction of new turnkey generation facilities. Gazprom, Rosneft, Lukoil, Zarubazhneft. These are our companies that are engaged in the development of oil and gas fields in Algeria, Egypt, Cameroon, Nigeria, and the Republic of the Congo. Over the past 2 years, exports to Africa of Russian crude oil, petroleum products, and liquefied natural gas have increased 2.6 times. Rosatom, our leading company in the use of nuclear energy, is building the Daba nuclear power plant in Egypt. At the same time, our state corporation can provide African countries with its unique experience and technologies that have no analogues in the world in the field of non-energy use of the peaceful atom, for example, in medicine and in the same agriculture. Of particular importance is the deepening of Russian-African industrial cooperation. Our industrial products, including automobiles, construction equipment, and so on, are well known on the continent and are in great demand. They are distinguished by good quality, reliability and ease of operation. In Africa, there are special service centers for servicing Russian equipment. New instruments of concessional lending are being developed for the purchase by Africans of our industrial products, their transportation to the continent and after-sales services. The Russian Export Credit and Investment Insurance Agency provides insurance coverage for loans. An Africa-oriented leasing mechanism and a specialized investment fund are being formed to participate in the financing of infrastructure projects. Yesterday I spoke with my colleague, with President Sisi. We are discussing this, and I hope that in Egypt we will launch the Russian industrial zone in the Suez Canal area in the near future. We expect that the construction of the first production facilities will begin there already this year, and in the future, the manufactured goods will be exported throughout Africa. Being one of the leaders in the field of information and communication technologies, Russia is expanding cooperation with African states in the field of information security, artificial intelligence, and the digital economy. We have good experience in creating and using information technologies in tax administration, in registering property rights, in providing electronic public services to citizens and legal entities, companies. We can assist interested African countries in launching similar systems. And we are always ready to share best practices in the context of technological development in order to further expand the entire range of trade and economic ties. It is important to switch more energetically in financial transactions for trade transactions to national currencies, including the ruble. In this regard, we are ready to work with African countries to develop their financial infrastructure, to connect banking institutions to the financial message transmission system created in Russia, which allows cross-border payments to be made regardless of some of the currently existing and restrictive Western systems. This will help increase the stability, predictability and security of mutual trade exchanges. Russia is also actively engaged in the reorientation of transport and logistics flows towards the states of the global south, including, of course, Africa. The International Transport Corridor North-South, which we are developing, aims to provide Russian goods with access to the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean, from where they can reach the African continent by the shortest sea route. Naturally, this corridor can also be used in the opposite direction to supply African goods to the Russian market, ensuring the connection of the north-south transport corridor with Africa, launching regular shipping cargo lines. This is what we are striving for. The opening of a Russian transport and logistics center in one of the ports on the African east coast would be a good thing, a good start to this joint work. Ensuring a wider coverage of the African continent by direct flights, we consider it very important. Participation in the development of the African railway network is the actual task on which we invite our African friends to work together.